Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of the German capital, Berlin. And this week here in Germany, all eyes have been on this man, popular comedian and satirist Jan Böhmermann. This after he launched a fierce satirical attack ridiculing Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey is furious and is calling on Berlin to prosecute Böhmermann, but his followers say in satire everything goes. Who's right, and how much will this clash of political cultures impact on relations between Germany and Turkey? Well, our question here on Quadriga this week is Germany's satire affair. Who will have the last laugh? And to discuss that question, I'm joined here in the studio by three excellent commentators and observers. Let me introduce them to you. Beginning with Andreas Kluth from the Economist magazine, who says this latest clash between Turkey and Germany is childish and irresponsible. Merkel and Erdogan need to start acting like adults, says Andreas. Meanwhile, Malte Lehming from Berlin's Tagesspiegel newspaper says any good satirist will be put on trial at least once in his lifetime. Jan Böhmermann will have the last laugh here. And Değer Akal also joins us. She works for DW's Turkish desk and has just returned from Turkey. She says politicians should not define the limits of satire because if they did, an entire nation might forget what satire is. Andreas Kluth, I'd like to begin with you, if I might. And earlier this week, I opened up one of my favourite Berlin newspapers and I was reading an article about this topic that we're discussing today, and it began with the following sentence. I'm quoting, yeah? It must, with all due respect, be said that Recep Tayyip Erdogan does not copulate with goats. Andreas, what is going on?
I work in that same presumption, first of all. What is going on is that a satirist named Jan Böhmermann had on March 31st done a short video clip on German public television, which is no longer available, but I was fortunate I saw it. Well, perhaps I was unfortunate to have seen it because it was not terribly tasteful. That is, I think, out of beyond question. And what he did some very funny meta irony in that clip, in that he started, I should say, he was reacting to another clip a few weeks earlier, which was quite tame and mild and almost boring, I thought, so actually bad as satire, but that had also lampooned and ridiculed Erdogan. And there was, Erdogan had complained, and there was a short discussion about freedom of the press and free speech. And in this one, all of Germany and Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, came down firmly on the side of free speech. And I believe he was reacting to that, Jan Böhmermann, when on March 31st he did the following. He opened and he said, well, look, there's a line between free speech and clearly illegal insults. Now, where's that line? Let me show you. If it had been illegal insult, it would have sounded like this. And then he proceeded to read a poem, which has poetry. I mean, it rhymed and stuff. And as you mentioned, there was Erdogan was a pedophile, homosexual, zoophile, although I'd prefer not to quote literally from the poem. But and that kicked up this disaster, this diplomatic disaster.
So it's fair to say that obscenities were hurled at the Turkish leader.
Not just obscenities, but it was just a string of pure, unadulterated. There was no content, there was no criticism of his politics. It was just, he, as you said, copulates with this, with every barnyard animal you can imagine.
Değer Akal, obscenities being hurled at the Turkish leader. What's the response in Turkey? You've just been there.
Well, AKP's and Erdogan's response is very, very hard.
So the governing party.
The governing party's response is very hard. The Turkish government has asked the Böhmermann to be prosecuted. There are reactions. People feel that Erdogan is being insulted. No one is talking about, you know, a criticism towards the situation in Turkey. It's more about Erdogan and the fact that he was insulted by a German comedian. That's the perception, the general perception in the public.
And when you saw this poem as presented on German TV, can I ask you what your we've had an initial reaction from Andreas. I think your opinion is pretty much clear, Andreas. What was your sort of your gut reaction deep down inside? What was how did you respond?
I really felt disgust, actually. I didn't I didn't understand his point. I thought about it a long time because in Turkey there is a really critical process going on. There are more than 2,000 people being prosecuted because they have. Erdogan is arguing that he perceives everything as an insult, even critics. So while these things are happening in Turkey, you don't expect something like this. I would have expected, or I do understand criticism, but this is obscene. I mean, I personally don't. I really didn't. I felt disgust. That's all I really felt.
OK, Andreas is nodding. Let's find out what Malte thinks.
I think it is disgusting, it is obscene, but given the history of it, it is brilliant as well. And the history just has been explained by Mr. Kluth that even the German ambassador has been called in Ankara to claim about the first video of Extra Dry, the satirical video. And that shows that I would say the Turkish government has some problems with freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And this was the topic of Jan Böhmermann. The problem with his poem is that to prove his point, and he intentionally, deliberately mixes satirical context and abusive words. That was his intention to do that. And the problem with this is, to make his point, 4 lines would have been enough. But the poem is like 20 lines. And if you have 20 lines, you send a message that goes, you might send a message, maybe unintentionally, but you might send a message that goes beyond that, that you fuel sentiments against not just Erdogan, but against people from Anatolia, Turkey, whatsoever, anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim sentiments, that you fuel of them just because of the length of it. It has 20 lines or something like that.
You talked about the point he was trying to make. Can you be a little bit more specific about what that point might be?
The point is to show the difference between... I mean, if he's claiming, I will show you now the difference between what is allowed and what is illegitimate. And if he, on the other side, then quotes a lot of words that are illegitimate, then he wants to, I would say, the distinction is not what he's aiming to, but the blurring of the distinction. By saying the freedom of speech always has to go beyond.
It was a way of circumventing it.
Yes.
That was the purpose of the opening.
His main
I'll
message
show you the
is satirical
to get around
words
it.
always goes beyond borders. Now you can argue it. I would say if that is covered by freedom of speech, let the court find out. So that's their task to do it, and Erdogan has the right, as every citizens have, to go on court and ask the court what's his opinion about is if this is covered by freedom of speech or not. I would not be afraid. I think Erdogan might lose in front of the court. He might win as well. But a court means a public place where all these things will be discussed in public again and again and again.
OK. Andreas has mentioned it already. This, the poem from Jan Böhmermann was followed an earlier broadcast here in Germany that was a song, a satirical song, also targeting Recep Tayyip Erdogan's policies in Turkey, his, and inverted commas, his authoritarian rule, as clearly the satirists see it. Let's just have a look at that material and then talk a little bit more about where the borders and limits of satire are.
Ist das Wahlergebnis schlecht? Das ruckelt zurecht. I like to move it. Kurden hasst wie die Pest, die bombardiert auch viel lieber als die Glaubensbrüder drüben beim IS. Gib ihm dein Geld, baut dir ein Flüchtlingszelt. Erdogan. Sein Land ist reif für einen EU-Beitritt, pfeift auf Demokratie. Tschü mit Ü, sagt Erdogan. Und reitet in den Sonnenuntergang.
Yeah, it's pretty strong stuff, I think. Yeah, Andreas, you don't quite agree, but...
Well, strong stuff relative to what? I mean, satire is a long tradition. I'm a German and an American, a dual citizen. The American in me finds this all well within the limits of free speech. In that sense, like Malte, I would think that even if it goes to a court, Mr. Böhmermann has nothing to fear. By the way, I should add, I think Erdogan is also making a fool of himself by being so upset Because you see, Mr. Böhmermann, this is the thing about satire, when it's so gratuitously over the top and ridiculous, without any content, this video at least had a little bit of content, why we're making fun of it, then it actually doesn't, it backfires. I mean, there's no harm done. If we've all been in pubs, or at least I've been in pubs and bars where we've called each other the very terms in the poem, and that's just what one does after the third beer, you know? And so I think he shouldn't be so upset, but I think it's well within the free speech. Free speech was made for offensive speech, not for reasonable speech. I mean, if we were all reasonable, we wouldn't need this consensus on free speech, and it'll pass. However,
Değer, what about the Turkish tradition of satire? I'm sure there is a lively tradition of satire in such a vibrant society. You know, what are Turkish people saying about this? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? Where is it a question of dignity and respect?
Well, this song, when I was in Ankara and Istanbul, this song, a lot of people sang this song and asked me, and really had fun with this song, actually.
That's interesting.
But the problem is, of course, there's political satire in Turkey. It has a long tradition, and there are still a lot of people trying to do it. But we have to say that in the late few years, you cannot see any programs and TV channels, on TV channels. There is no political satire anymore because there are a lot of convictions and there are a lot of prosecutions. So what do you expect me to say? I mean, there is, of course, there are a lot of people still using social media and other channels, but we cannot see it. You know, it's not on the agenda anymore. We don't have those programs on TV anymore.
There's a context. All this is taking place against the backdrop of the real world of politics and the deal recently clinched between the European Union and Turkey over the refugee crisis in the broadest sense. Is there any danger, Malte, that this, what is a satirical skit, could actually scupper that deal and have a huge political impact?
Yes, I think the context is very, very important. And the context is what made this satirical affair almost, and I wouldn't say it's a state affair, but it made it almost as a state affair between Erdogan and Merkel, because the first way Erdogan chose to go was to a kind of law that protects leaders of the world against insulting, but the Merkel government has to open the gate for that. So Merkel has now two ways to go. Either she denies Erdogan his right to go on court, and which is simply a human right that every citizen has, and especially as a leader of a foreign state, or she opens the prosecuting way, but then would be regarded from most Germans as being submissive to the Turkish president, as a slave of her own refugee policy, which would be very, very political in terms. So this is what she might have contributed to that. Her first initial reaction to the poem was, it is not, what would be the translation, deliberately offensive. It is deliberately offensive. How can she ever says and close the processual way with this quote? I think she has no alternative than to open that.
But the process, even if she opens the road, it's problematic because we had several cases related to this subject in France, for example, or even in Turkey. The president is using a similar article in the Turkish criminal court for all these proceedings. The problem is that the European Court of Human Rights has a decision that presidents are not privileged. So this article might not be valid anyway. So even if she opens the gate for this article, it might end up at the European Court of Human Rights, and it won't work. So I personally don't believe that Merkel will open the door anyway. I don't think, I think it's Turkey's miscalculation, it's Erdogan's mistake to put Merkel in such a difficult position domestically, because Merkel is the only Western ally who still has communication channels with Turkey, which is in Turkey's interest. So I don't see any gains for Turkey, which is dramatic actually, because if Merkel doesn't open the door, it will be for the prosecution. It will be, you know, a good point for Merkel politically. She will have great support. I don't think she will open it, but even if she would, he would not be punished. He would not. It would not be considered as a criminal offence.
Okay,
But
Andreas.
that'd be up for the court to decide, I would say. I mean, if I would say yes, clearly, if she opens the door for the prosecution, then it would be regarded, as I said before, by many Germans as being submissive, and she would clearly lose some kind of confidence in between her own electorate. But on the other hand, it is not that she is saying, I think Jan Böhmermann should be punished. It's just that I see the conditions have been met to open the court, the procedural way. That's the only message she should make. And why to deny the Turkish leader the right that every other leader in the world and every citizen has? It is not her duty to do that. So I think just on legal terms, and give him the privilege to say, to present himself as a martyr. Or look, the Angela Merkel now says that I don't have the right to go on court. She might have been a bad conscience or something like this. I mean, in a rhetorical way, is she the real winner if she denies that? I know. I think it would be much smarter and clever to open.
The real tragedy in this is that we are already, all week here in Germany, have been forgetting that we're talking about, at heart, something incredibly ridiculous. When, in fact, at the same time, there is a refugee crisis and a Syrian war, and problems with Russia, to all three of which crises, Turkey is now an absolutely central player. And by the way, into this, the backdrop of this distraction, which is what it is an incredibly complicated history between Merkel and Erdogan. Merkel, with Nicolas Sarkozy in 2007, opposed Turkish the Turkish wish to negotiate to join the EU. Yeah. At that time, Erdogan was not yet that bad. He was allegedly a reformer. I think that snub certainly accelerated his path the other way. She treated him, she criticized him a lot in the intervening years. Then the refugee crisis happens, and suddenly she needs him. And this is the skepticism in the German population. There was a poll just a few weeks ago, ARD poll, that said, I think a large number, I think 70% of Germans thought that Turkey is not to be trusted as a partner. For France and America, it was the other way around. Yeah. And so you have to solve these crises, and both Merkel and Erdogan are central players in solving any of these crises. And right now, they're talking about zoophilia and homosexuality and pedophilia. I mean, this is a problem if you're dealing with a crisis.
Another underline of the whole affair, the satirical affair, is that Germans don't like to be so much dependent on Turkey as they are right now because of the refugee crisis. And they are dependent on Turkey and on Erdogan's good behavior and things like this. And given all the delicate German-Turkish relationship and prejudices in Germany towards Turkish immigrants and so on, they just hate themselves for being dependent on Turkey. That's why in all this self-hate comes up with a satirical kind of frame. So I think that's the underline of the whole thing.
That's how Germans feel at this point in time. Let's just find out now how some members of the Turkish community are feeling, and we go to the Berlin district of Kreuzberg, which has a big Turkish community.
The Berlin Turkish community believes that no one in this country is entitled to absolutely unlimited freedom. One person's freedom ends where the next person's freedom begins.
We can't express our opinions. That's not democracy.
The press has got to be free, no matter what they write. But you've got to have some limits.
Değer Akal, we've mentioned it already in the conversation that there are certainly a lot of people have been saying, and I think you've said it yourself already, that there are perhaps racist, anti-Turkish undertones in this poem from Jan Böhmermann. What do you say about that?
No, I agree. I thought the same thing. I think it was a step too far, and I felt it.
Andreas, a racist poem?
You know, this is... I didn't perceive it that way, but if you look at me, I'm not very Turkish or likely to be sensitized. As I said, I've heard this in pubs and bars many times.
A young Turkish journalist, I was reading the other day, a litany of the cheapest and worst prejudices about Turks.
Yes, well, I mean, this is an open question. That is news to me. I didn't know what, where that would come from necessarily. As I said, it's just to me, it's an off-the-shelf, gratuitous insult you hurl at anybody when you just need a really perverse insult. You and I would have done it if I tried to provoke you. That's what he was trying to do. I don't see anything particularly as a Turkish stereotype here.
Okay.
But there is something particularly Turkish about it. I would say, I mean, if we just for the sake of the argument, to construct an example, if the same would have happened to the Prime Minister of Israel, and the satirist would have said the same things with all the thing of satirical and obscenity, the mixture of that towards that, would he be denied to go to court and ask for revenge or for? I don't think so, and I don't think this kind of huge outcry against Erdogan would have happened, and if it would be seen as anti-Israel or things like that. So very, very quickly. So it has to do with a special German-Turkish relationship, as we have a special German-Israeli relationship, without any doubt.
But I would like to add something. Although I thought there were aspects that I wouldn't really want to hear again, I think freedom of expression, satire, should not be an offence, a criminal offence. I am against the fact that he could be punished. It should not be a criminal offence. And this is what is actually, maybe he is challenging right now. That's why I think it's very important and it's very interesting to follow the discussions in Germany, because it might expand freedom of expression in Germany, because it might not be a criminal offence anymore. We will see the discussions, but I think that's an important point. Freedom of
I think it's a little bit strange to see now, especially the Germans, to be the most freedom-loving nation on earth, especially when it comes to freedom of speech. They invented the Holocaust denial paragraph. They are in the forefront against Facebook and to tilt all the hate commentaries on Facebook and things like this. So freedom of expression and freedom of speech is not a value that is on the... I mean, we have Einigkeit and Recht und Freiheit, the unity and right and freedom, and this is the right order for Germans usually. First unity, then the right, and then freedom comes at last.
It's an interesting point, Andreas.
Well, I was just going to say, I'd like to add into the mix, because we're all talking about how ridiculous Böhmermann is. That is essentially the topic of this discussion. But I'd like it to add these two more important people, because Böhmermann will not solve either the Syrian civil war or the refugee crisis or the Russian crisis. We have Merkel and Erdogan primarily that we're concerned with. They need to get back to business. And of those two, I think if you look at them, Angela Merkel, as you can tell, that she's taken the whole week to decide. She has not yet made a decision, which I think in this kind of thing is unusual. She's getting advice from many people. That shows you she's struggling with it. But she is clearly responsible in the way that she'd like to move on to the bigger things. This is all a tragedy to her. Erdogan, however, loves getting sidetracked into these infantile, childish little things, and he provokes himself all the time, not in the way of satire, but he needs a good spanking in the press for a different reason, because he needs to get down to business. He is a world leader. He wants to be
let me break a lance for Mr. Erdogan. I mean, the fact of the matter is he is the subject of, of attacks that have featured obscenities. He's peaked, obviously, personally. I find it very difficult to imagine the German media and the German satirists, who do tend to be rather tame in general. I find it very difficult to imagine them launching an attack on Chancellor Merkel that would include sheep and copulation in the same sentence.
No, but if they did, I think they shouldn't go to jail. And if they did, this was my point earlier, they would make themselves so ridiculous. The satirist would it would be career-ending for a satirist to do that poem about her. That's the best way to unmask bad satire, is let them undo themselves and then move on.
But I would say we have far too many, and I agree completely with you, we have far too many rules who limit the freedom of speech in Germany. We are not a freedom of speech-loving country. We have far too many rules. But if we have these kind of laws, And it comes a moment like this to say, so now we want freedom of speech and not consider the law. That would be double talk. If we have these laws, we have to ask if it's in between the law or not.
Okay.
So, and then open the gate for a procedural case.
Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time. Who's going to have the last laugh on this story? That was our question at the beginning. What do you say, Malte?
I would say Jan Böhmermann, because whatever happens, even if he got prosecuted, he would be regarded by the Germans as one of the best satirical satirists.
The last laugh?
The last laugh, Böhmermann, I agree.
Okay. Is it just going to be all tears?
I think tears all around, all three of them.
I suspected you were going to say that, yeah? OK. Thanks very much, all of you, for joining me here today. It's been an interesting debate. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought at home. If we have, join us next week. And do get in touch via mail or social media. Bye-bye from Quadriga for now. Tschüss.